Today on News and Views,
they are so woefully unaware of what our own law says, and these are people who are supposed to be implementing the said law. He filed a complaint against someone who's been his neighbor for 30 odd years. For me, that blew my mind.
There is, a clear perception that conversions themselves are wrong, whether they are forced or not forced.
Our story isn't trying to contest what the law says. Our story is simply trying to say that the law isn't being applied properly, it's being applied erroneously.
the Uttar Pradesh Prohibition of Unlawful Conversion of Religion Act was passed in November 2020 as an ordinance and then subsequently assented as an act. Since then, several people have been arrested for forceful conversions in Uttar Pradesh. But my investigation, spanning across various districts of the state, has revealed a major loophole. Many of the FIRs and subsequent arrests in cases of forceful religious conversion go against the very law that they are based on. You're listening to News and Views, and I'm Fatima Khan. And in this episode, I talk about my investigative story on the Quint with my editor, Aditya Menon. We will be talking about the story behind the story, how I went about the reporting, how I made sense of the findings, and the several dots we had to join to be able to pull off an investigation of this kind. Check out the full video on the Quint's YouTube channel and check out other podcasts by the Quint on your favorite streaming apps.
So Fatma, one of the questions that people who watched the documentary and those who read the entire text copy, they asked was that at what point did you discover whether these cases and this misuse of this law is systemic and not sporadic?
Right. So I think part of it was to ensure that, it's the first step whenever you're doing a story of this kind is to get the documentation in hand. So for me, the most important thing was that I'm able to get all the FIRs and a significant number of FIRs and read through them. All these FIRs are written in Hindi. Not a lot of them are written very well. Some of them have, they have a few gaps, or they have some printing errors in the printouts that I got. But how do I ensure that I am able to read enough of them to see that this is a pattern? And more than that, the fact that this isn't just limited to one city or district, but spread across various districts, so that we can say that this isn't the fault or folly of one thana, where one police officer is just unaware of the law, but the fact that everyone across thanas that I'm speaking to just doesn't know that you can't be filing such a complaint. And I think that just so remarkable for me. That was the most remarkable feature of this, that they are so woefully unaware of what our own law says, and these are people who are supposed to be implementing the said law. So I think just copious amounts of research, talking to people on the ground, keeping your ear close to the ground, very cliche journalistic stuff that we say, it comes into use in investigations like these.
So when you pointed this out to the police officials, that the law is saying something else and you are arresting people based on complaints from people who really can't be filing those complaints, what was their response like?
So the response was frankly quite universally appalling. Across the police stations that I spoke to, everyone, their first reaction was, no, anyone can file a complaint. Anyone who is seeing any wrongdoing taking place can file a complaint. And then I said, no, but this act categorically states that only so and so can be the complainant, which is either the aggrieved party, meaning on whom the forceful conversion has been attempted, or a relative of the aggrieved party. But they were like, no, if you see some wrongdoing happening around you, won't you file a complaint? So I felt like that initially, when I was going ahead, when I went into this investigation, I frankly thought that the police will have some excuse, some way that they are just going around the law. But here they just didn't know. Just the lack of knowledge in itself then became a part of the story, as opposed to me just asking them and then them giving an excuse and that back and forth taking place. Here it just became about the complete ignorance. Of course, makes for an important story, but we must all remember that there are actual people who suffer as a consequence of this complete lack of knowledge of our own laws in the legal system.
एक सवाल हिंदी में आया है मुझे कि जो लोग इसके तहत अरेस्ट हुए हैं उनकी रिहाई कितने वक्त में हुई है और जब वो बताते हैं कि हमें ये कानून के जो धाराएं हैं उससे हटकर हमें अरेस्ट किया गया, तो उनकी सुनवाई हो पाती है या नहीं हो पाती है? तो उन्हें राहत कितने वक्त में मिलती है, और अभी भी क्या उनके खिलाफ केसेस चल रहे हैं या नहीं?
सो राहत का जो पीरियड है वो वेरी करता है फ्रॉम 2 months to 5 months to 8 months to more. लेकिन वो राहत भी होती है टेम्परेरी, माने कि वो बेल होती है. वो अभी भी जिन कईयों से मैं मिली हूँ उनका अभी भी ट्रायल चल रहा है, वो ट्रायल कोर्ट में है अभी भी उनका प्रोसेस. तो उनको अभी भी अक्विट नहीं किया गया है. वो एक तरह से अभी भी कभी भी उनको फिर से अरेस्ट हो सकती है. तो अभी भी दे आर जस्ट आउट ऑन बेल. एंड ऐसा होता है कि कई केसेस में उनको खुद समझ ही नहीं आता है शुरू के कुछ दिन कि हुआ क्या. ये तो हम अपनी प्रेयर कर रहे थे, हम अपनी सर्विस कर रहे थे. चलिए आप ये भी मान लीजिए कि हम प्रीच कर रहे थे, लेकिन वो एक मोमेंट ही लगता है समझने में कि ये इसमें तो कुछ गलत था ही नहीं, ये तो हम इस देश में ज़माने से करते आ रहे हैं. फिर वो लॉयर्स को लाते हैं, फिर लॉयर समझाते हैं कि नहीं अच्छा ये ऐसे 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 हुआ. फिर वो जाते हैं. एक लॉयर ने मुझे बताया, बहुत ही जो मुझे शौक हुआ ये जान के, कि जब वो मजिस्ट्रेट के पास गए, मजिस्ट्रेट को भी पता नहीं था ये एक्ट है. मजिस्ट्रेट को एक्ट की कॉपी पकड़ाई गई, लॉ की कॉपी उन्होंने खोल के देखी. फिर वो चौकन्ना हुए कि अरे ये तो लॉ कहता है कि आप कंप्लेनेंट हो ही नहीं सकते हैं. सो जस्ट दिस ऑल ओवर, क्योंकि आपने ये नॉर्म बना दिया. आपने नॉर्म बना दिया कि कोई भी आके बोलेगा कि इस घर में और इस पड़ोस में और इस इलाके में यहाँ पे फोर्सफुल कन्वर्जन हो रहे हैं, तो पुलिस इमिडिएटली अरेस्ट कर लेगी. नहीं करेगी तो उनको जो लोकल पॉपुलेशन है, जो ज़्यादातर जो कंप्लेनेंट्स थे, दे आर वेरी पावरफुल एंड स्ट्रॉन्ग लोकली, तो उनके दबाव पे फिर आपको आके फाइल करनी पड़ेगी कंप्लेंट. तो हाँ, ये चल रहा है प्रोसेस अभी.
So one more question that I had was the cases that you had identified. I noticed that most of the people who had converted were either from OBC or SC backgrounds, and with one exception of that of Jitu Sonkar, all the other complainants were from the so-called upper castes. So is there also a caste element in this entire thing?
That's definitely an interesting observation. I observed that too, but I haven't studied that well enough and deep enough to actually be able to come to a strong conclusion, which is why something of this sort didn't make it to our story either. But generally speaking, I think the fact of the matter is that a vast majority of conversions in general take place from people who are from underprivileged and oppressed castes. So I feel like, and when you speak to them also about why they converted, much of their motivation might also have to do with that. But the reason why we made a conscious call of not even entering that space in the realm of this story was because we were strictly limiting ourselves to what the law says and how the law is clearly, explicitly, blatantly being breached in this case. But I think as a sociological study and as just a thought experiment, it's worth wondering why this was the case.
Yeah, one question that one of our viewers is asking is how did you manage to get some of these vigilantes to speak at so much length?
Yeah, that's always the number one question I get whenever I do stories like these. Personally, my friends and family were also my DMs, and people who read and watch the story are always curious about this. So, frankly, this is my job as a journalist, right? Like, it's literally my requirement. My job is to just go and get all the stakeholders in any conversation to talk to me, to speak to me on record, to tell me their version of events. That's just a prerequisite. I need to do it, So when I have that mindset, I make sure that I get that version, I get that take. And of course, it doesn't happen all the time. I do fail miserably a lot of times in getting those quotes, not just from the vigilantes, but whoever are the victims in any circumstance or situation. Even they might not be willing to speak to me. Here I felt like, one, beyond like the claims of objectivity and getting all versions and getting quote unquote all sides, that all journalists love making those claims, but even barring those, I have personally always felt, and I know some peers of mine might disagree, but the fact is that when you get these people to talk to you, you allow for your final product to be so much more enriched. Like, I feel like it's important that if someone is a rioter, to go and ask them, why did you do this? What led you to do this? What was your motivation? What was your drive? Here, the fact that Sudhir Gupta, who's a local BJP leader, he filed a complaint against someone who's been his neighbor for 30 odd years. For me, that blew my mind. So when I went and spoke to him, and this part didn't make it to the final cut, where I asked him that, you barely live 100, 200 feet away from each other. How did you even look at each other, and didn't your paths cross after that? And they're like, yeah, it did, and it was weird because before that हमारा बहुत आना जाना था एक दूसरे के घर, उसके बाद ऐसे हो गया, लेकिन this is a principled cause. मैं एक आइडियोलॉजी के साथ खड़ा हूँ, तो मैं कोई भी नेबर, कोई भी रिश्तेदार, कोई भी मुझसे रूठ जाए, मुझे फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता, बिकॉज आई एम हियर फॉर अ बिगर पर्पज़, आई एम डूइंग दिस फॉर अ बिगर पर्पज़. तो जब उन्होंने वो बात बोली, मुझे लगा कि वो एक नैरेटिव निकलना बहुत ज़रूरी है, बिकॉज आजकल यही हो रहा है. नेबर्स आर टर्निंग अगेंस्ट ईच अदर, फ्रेंड्स फ्रॉम कॉलेज आर turning out to be people who you didn't think they would. So if this is happening, I think there is a way to very not very crassly, but perhaps in a more dignified way, to bring out those fault lines that are in our society in these stories. When I go and speak to them, I just honestly, it's all about asking them. I say, okay, why did you do this? And they'll go on. They'll talk endlessly about why they did this. As everyone wants to feel heard, and I feel like it's my job to make sure that they feel heard. And that's pretty much what I do. And also, just I wing it. And that's also an answer. I feel like beyond all this intellectualism, you just have to wing it a lot of the times on the field.
So I'd like to come back to Sudhir Gupta for a bit. What was Bahadur Maurya? I think that's his neighbor. I think what was his reaction to being this sort of object of scrutiny from his own neighbor?
Yeah, I think he was definitely very, very disheartened. I mean, I remember this one line he said कि वैसे तो ये बहुत अच्छे हैं, पता नहीं अब उनको क्या हो गया, पता नहीं उनको ये क्यों किया उन्होंने. तो I was like कि अभी आपने मुझे आधा घंटा 1 घंटा सुनाया कि इन्होंने आपको कितना बुरी तरह ट्रीट किया, और अब आप ये लाइन बोल रहे हैं कि ये वैसे तो बहुत अच्छे हैं. So I think it's also because you're coping in that moment, right? You are also just not being able to process that my neighbor of 3 or decades did this against me, and you want to find some sort of a way to rationalize that. तो उस केस में भी यही हुआ था कि वो बोल रहे हैं कि वैसे तो बहुत अच्छे हैं, बट ये उनको जाने क्या हो गया अभी, क्योंकि वो अभी भी समझ ही नहीं पाए. बिकॉज सिंस देन आई आस्क्ड हिम, हैज़ ही एवर कम टू यू विद एन एक्सप्लेनेशन, हैज़ ही एवर ट्राइड टू मेंड ब्रिजेस, एंड ही वाज लाइक, नो, none of that. This is how any kind of society kind of breaks away from one another, right? When people who you think there is an implicit trust with, right? These are not family members, these are neighbors, but with our neighbors we are supposed to have this implicit trust that you will have my back and I'll have yours. When that is in itself broken, not just the two people involved, but I think generally in that area there is the sense of great distrust that spreads and had spread.
There is, a clear perception that conversions themselves are wrong, whether they are forced or not forced. And then, I was seeing some of the comments on our video on YouTube. They were citing the case of, again, Bahadur Maurya, that he seems to have been converted because of an event related to his own health. And this is that there was some ill health in the family or misfortune in the family, and after conversion, things became better. We see such cases in Punjab also, and it often strengthens the argument of the anti-conversion brigade, because the conversion, according to them, seems happening due to not scientific reasons or reasons that don't really make sense. So how does one negotiate this space of conversion themselves being seen in a wrong light, and then of course such allegations that conversions are taking place due to these kind of reasons?
The thing about conversion not taking place due to a quote-unquote scientific reason is that faith doesn't exist because of a scientific reason, right? Like, faith isn't scientific, and I have no qualms in saying that. It is something that's beyond the realm of science. It's, you believe because you believe, period. You can't explain it, you can't rationalize it, you can't find, people do attempt to do that, and it's great. If that works for you, that works for you, but ultimately it's about what's in your heart. And I don't just mean the religious faith, but any kind of faith. Belief in any system or person or relationship or identity is a matter of the heart. And which is what our constitution makers knew so fully well, which is why Article 25 of the Indian Constitution explicitly says that the right to, it's not just the right to espouse a faith, but the right to profess and propagate. Because when you so fully believe in a system, you want to go around spreading it, right? And I don't just mean a religious system, I mean like communism, or even, you know, a right-wing ideology. People stick out their necks right, left, and center to spread their faith in those contexts as well. But that somehow seemed acceptable, but not here. And which is why, you know, and this is something I picked up as well, that when I was speaking to all the vigilantes, they kept, when I said, what did you find there when you reached there? Chalo, fine, they didn't attempt conversion on you, but what exactly was your quote-unquote proof? And they said, oh, they all had cross and Bible on them. I said, what does that even mean? How is that proof of any kind of forceful conversion? Chalo, at best, it's proof of conversion, but it cannot be proof of forceful conversion. And even if it is proof of conversion, that in itself isn't a problem, which is why I asked Sudhir Gupta that, do you have problem with all conversion? And he actually said that he does. So my point is that these people who are supposedly fighting against forceful conversion, they aren't like these great constitutionalists or pro-freedom people, right? They don't believe in that. Or then they'd be like, हाँ चलो अपनी मर्जी से कर रहे हो तो कोई problem नहीं है. But none of them said that. So which is why I felt that it was really relevant to bring out that point that these people, like, they are against what our constitution has guaranteed to us in so many words. And people, just to bring out that point, right, people convert for a number of reasons, and people continue to believe in the faith that their parents have taught to them also for a number of reasons, you know, and that might have to do with the confirmation bias, that might have to do with suddenly you getting an epiphany that this is the faith that's meant for me, or it might just have to do with convenience, frankly. But it's none of our business, right? People believe in what they believe in for their own sake.
Again, I really request all those who are listening to this and who are tracking our documentaries to please contribute to the Quint. Such stories require resources, both in terms of labor as well as in terms of other costs. So you can find the link for our membership on the Quint's Twitter handle. I'll go back to the questions. So do the vigilantes or even the law, do they define forced conversions in any way, or any government authority? Is there clarity on what constitutes a forced conversion?
Yes, the law does explicitly define, in fact, the law defines every single aspect of the law, right? So the law is written, if you've ever read any ordinance or act, they are meant to, obviously there's a paragraph, and then every major word or phrase used in that paragraph is defined and delineated. So in this act, when I've opened it up in front of me, it explicitly says that to provide for prohibition of unlawful conversion from one religion to another by misrepresentation, force, undue influence, coercion, allurement, or by any fraudulent means, or by marriage, and for matters concerned therewith or incidental hitherto. And then they go on to describe what, say, allurement would mean, which is, and I'm reading from the law, it says that it includes offer of any temptation in the form of any gift or employment or free education or better lifestyle. Coercion would mean, of course, compelling someone against their own will. Force would mean, show of a threat of injury, or fraudulent means would mean impersonation of any kind, impersonation by false name, religious symbol, etc., and so on and so forth. Undue influence is something that they've described as using unconscientious means to influence someone or have power over someone to persuade them, etc. So on and so forth. The act keeps going on. So to be fair, the law very comprehensively and explicitly does describe what forceful or fraudulent conversion or any kind of unlawful conversion would mean. Now you can disagree with it, right? You can say that, oh, but isme ye bhi ho sakta hai, oh, but why should this not be allowed, etc. Now that is a separate conversation altogether, but the law is pretty clear on what forceful conversion stands for and what it comprises of. उसके आगे जो है, again, like, our story isn't trying to contest what the law says. That's a conversation for another day. Our story is simply trying to say that the law isn't being applied properly. It's being applied erroneously.
One of our listeners, Mr. Rizq, he's asking if these incidents take place mainly in tier 3, 4, 5 cities, or are there such incidents of this law being implemented in this way, even in tier 1 and 2 cities?
No, I don't think this is limited to tier 3 or 2. I mean, we covered Varanasi. Varanasi would be fairly, like, it's very big and important city in the country, and so I don't think this law or the application of this law being erroneous is limited to any particular area or district. I do feel that maybe, within the district there will be some areas that have, say, a higher population of oppressed caste people, and of converts by virtue of that. So I feel like in that particular thana or jurisdiction there might be more such cases that we'll find, but generally it's not limited to one city or district.
The people arrested, you found, are mostly Christians, or have Muslims or people from other minorities also faced arrests under this law, particularly through these fraudulent complainants?
Yeah, so generally we know that several Muslims have been arrested as part of this anti-conversion law that has been brought into place since 2020. But the way that what we have covered is the wrongful application of this law. In that sense, I found in my research and in my fieldwork that it was mostly Christians who were targeted, and there's a reason for that, right? When Muslims are wrongfully arrested in these cases, it's usually that they are slapped with something called, unfortunately, what has come to be known as quote unquote love jihad. So in that case, they inevitably end up finding one family member at least of the girl who says that, she had an affair with him and he misused his power on her or used fraudulent means and influence to convert her, and so he should be arrested. So in that sense, the basic requirement of the law that a family member needs to be the one filing the complaint, that gets fulfilled. So that isn't a skirting of the law in that case. Whereas in this case, because it's usually prayer services that are targeted, you don't end up finding either a victim or a quote-unquote aggrieved party or their family member or relative to be doing that. So Christians end up being a target of this in this scheme.
Do they, people who have been targeted, do they get a lot of support from local civil society, or do they mostly have to rely on their own community support systems?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's the latter. I think it's you do have to reach out to, the sense I got is, right, most of the people who were arrested, did have to reach out to, say, their church members, or going via someone to a lawyer who's dealt with several such cases. Like, most of the lawyers I spoke to, and I spoke to multiple, had seen several such cases. Like, they were like, okay, I'll have to go back to my files and look up this one particular case you're asking me about, because almost all cases are a replica of one another.
Mr. Narsi, he has commented that aren't anti-conversion laws against our constitution in the first place?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have a very strong opinion on that as of now. I think the idea of forceful conversion being wrong and incorrect isn't new, right? Of course, the barrage of acts we've seen have come into place in the last 3-4 odd years. But just the idea that you shouldn't, someone should be able to convert and believe in what they believe in by virtue of their will and their own volition, that has existed, and that is basically just also the essence of Article 25, right? It is the essence. Ultimately, we have to see the Constitution by the letter, yes, but also by its spirit. And the spirit of that article is that you should be able to believe in whatever the hell you want to believe in. So in that sense, I feel that if you compel someone else to believe in something that they don't inherently believe in, then that does go against this article, and in that sense, forceful conversion then does become a problem. So I don't see how that is an issue. Of course, I think all of us know how these laws are brought into place and why they're brought into place, and who are the people who ultimately end up suffering because of them.
Yeah, in fact, I'll also like to add over here. There was another question asking whether the law themselves are neutral or not. So, I mean, we are not really looking at the merits of the law, but even just looking at how the law itself is being misused. Of course, within law, the Haryana law gives more legal scope for vigilantes to get involved in the complaint process. So what in UP is violation of the law, in Haryana won't even be a violation of the law. So in that sense, the Haryana law is even more arbitrary than the UP law.
And the Haryana law, just to add, allows for a government officer to file a complaint. And then Akar Patel pointed this out after a story came out that the Karnataka law even allows for even more scope for vigilantes to file these complaints, because it allows for colleagues to come and become a complainant, which then just opens up a Pandora's box.
Did you face any hostility or any threats from some of these people you interviewed, or I mean, even after the story came out, particularly, I think?
Yeah, I don't like talking about it because I find it a little bit vain. I mean, I talk about it in my personal circles, but the reason I don't publicly talk about it too much, unless it becomes obviously very extreme, is because I feel like this is what I signed up for. I've signed up for a job that allows me to pursue stories like these, and when you pursue stories like these, inevitably it comes with a fair share of hostility. Just approaching such people and requesting them for an interview, getting them to come and meet you, or for them to allow you to enter their homes and sitting down with you, all of that can be a fairly hostile process. But it's something that I've signed up to do. It's my job, it's part of my job, and I enjoy it, and yeah.
Shamsul Rahman Alvi sir, he is saying that Madhya Pradesh has registered many such cases, but generally they don't even go reported. So I think something for our next investigation.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good, interesting idea for us to pursue.
Please again do watch Fatima's documentary if you haven't already. Fatima worked very hard on this along with our camera person Shiv Kumar Maurya. They spent several days in Eastern UP trying to find these case studies and following up with both the vigilantes as well as the police. A lot of hard work has gone into this documentary. Please do help us do more of such investigations by contributing to the Quint. Do help us with ideas like Alvi sir just gave us, and yeah, just keep tracking our stuff. Thank you again for joining us on this.
And this was News and Views, the Quint's podcast series. And in this episode, I talked about my report from Uttar Pradesh about arrests being made on account of forceful religious conversion. Check out the full story on www.thequint.com and comment your thoughts below. News and Views is a Quint original podcast, executive produced by Shelly Walia and Ritu Kapoor. This episode was hosted by Fatima Khan and Aditya Menon, produced by Pratik Liddu, and edited by Anjali Palor. The theme music is from BMG.
You were listening to the Quint's podcast.